You're watching UATV English. We broadcast from the heart of Europe, Ukraine's on air. My name is Anna Nichenko. Hello and welcome. Starving nations seek help and reaction to food crisis provoked by Russia. That's our topic for today. So, East African agriculture has been hit by drought, and such countries as Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Sudan and Nigeria are completely dependent on grain imports. Egypt is one of the largest importers of Ukrainian agri-products. Experts say that Russia's withdrawal from the grain deal will aggravate the situation in these countries.
This will greatly complicate our ability to feed hungry people. There are already 80 million people in the region suffering from severe food insecurity. This is affected by a whole range of factors. It's conflict, climate, economic shocks and, of course, COVID. This suspension of the initiative will only exacerbate an already dire situation.
Russia has not only announced its withdrawal from the grain agreement, but also started mass shelling of Ukrainian grain storage facilities and port infrastructure. In the port of Chernomorsk in Odessa region, 60,000 tons of Ukrainian grain was destroyed due to Russian shelling on 18th and 19th of July. That would have been enough to feed almost 300 people for a year, said Britain's United Nations representative Barbara Woodward. Following the Russian shelling of Ukrainian grain storage facilities, Dmytro Kuleba has called on Asian and African countries to respond to Russia's terrorism together.
Russia hit another Ukrainian grain storage overnight. It tries to extract concessions by holding 400 million people hostage. I urge all nations, particularly those in Africa and Asia, who are most affected by rising food prices, to mount a united global response to food terrorism. Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on Twitter.
Bilateral cooperation, President Zelensky, peace formula and food security in Africa were the main topics of the discussion.
Дуже успішний був перший візит Кулеби, який був.
Kuleba's first visit, which was last autumn, was very successful, but it was partially interrupted because of Russian shelling. There was another visit in the spring, quite successful. East Africa in particular, a successful visit to Ethiopia, where Kuleba met with the president of Ethiopia. This is such a weighty factor for many African states.
And according to the German foreign minister, acute hunger currently affects about 350 million people in the world.
Prices on international markets have already risen by 5 to 10%, and this is a critical situation for East African countries that have been buying grain from Ukraine to a lesser extent from Russia. Will they be able to provide that level of food, and will they be able to feed themselves? This is fraught with internal instability. It is fraught with mass riots, if not revolutions. In fact, it will lead to nothing good.
And on the night of 23 July, Russia launched a new massive attack on the historical center of Odessa. 25 architectural monuments, which are on the UNESCO list of cultural heritage, were damaged. This includes Odessa's largest Orthodox church.
Fathers, we no longer have the Savior Transfiguration Cathedral. There is no altars there, and everything is completely destroyed.
Ukraine's allies have strongly condemned new Russian strikes on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and Moscow's threat to Black Sea shipping. The situation with the transport of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea was also discussed at the meeting of the Ukraine NATO Council. And Putin tried to prove that he is still strong and in control of the situation, started destroying Ukrainian grain and churches, experts believe.
First, he had to negotiate with the bandit Prigozhin, then he couldn't go to South Africa because they would arrest him, and here there was no room left in his bag for Erdogan's knives, and the accomplices whisper around that the Tsar is not real, and it's scary even in the far dark corner of the bunker, and you have to prove that you are strong. But how to do it when you're weak? What does a bandit who's down in his own circle do? Go goes to school and starts beating first graders. Serhiy Fursa, economic expert on Facebook.
More explanations and details from my guest. So, Yulia Kazdobina, head of the Ukrainian Foundation for Security Studies and a senior fellow with the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. Hello and welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. One of our viewers wrote me, Ukraine wants to feed the world, but Russia wants to starve people to death. At the same time, Russian propaganda falsely claims that Ukrainian grain was primarily exported to the European Union and not to African or Asian countries. This is lie, of course we understand this, but according to official United Nations data, 61% of all grain exported through the Black Sea Grain Initiative went to countries other than the European Union. But on your opinion, what kind of more facts we can give to explain that Russia lies?
Well, it's true that most of food was not going to the European Union. The biggest buyers of the food were actually China, Egypt, and Turkey. And there was a separate initiative called Grain from Ukraine, where grain went to feed the poorest countries of the world under the UN program. But what's important is that Ukraine is a big exporter of foodstuffs. And so the very fact that Ukrainian grain was coming to the world market was helping to keep the prices down, which means that even the situation in the market stable, which was also helpful to the poorest countries, and they were able to feed their population.
And as we know, Russia has not only withdrawn from the grain initiative, but has also targeted Ukraine's ports in Odessa and Mykolaiv regions, destroying infrastructure required for sea exports. And the Ukraine NATO Council held its second meeting. According to their statement, NATO will strengthen intelligence in the Black Sea region after this withdrawal from the grain after shelling, but exporting grain under shelling. How it's possible?
From what I understand, from the very beginning, it was clear that Russia was not going to abide by the conditions of the deal, and from the very beginning, Russia started undermining it and making claims, disinformation claims that Ukraine was not abiding by the conditions of the deal. And so the Ukrainian government actually took precaution against this situation that we're seeing right now. And it started looking for alternative routes to export Ukrainian grain. And so if when the grain deal was signed, Ukraine exported more than 90% of its food by sea. Now it's only 30%, so it's still a pretty big percentage, but it's a lot smaller than it was in the beginning. And the situation has escalated significantly, and Russia threatens to attack civilian vessels that travel to Ukrainian ports, and it claims that it's going to consider them as those carrying military cargo. So, but I think what's going to happen, as the deal itself was brokered by the United Nations and the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, most likely he's going to discuss this with Russia, with Russian President Vladimir Putin, because for Erdogan, this grain deal was a big diplomatic success, and President Putin withdrawing from it is a slap in the face. And so most likely it's not going to be exporting grain under shelling. Most likely President Erdogan, who still has some leverage against President Putin, is going to make sure that the grain deal continues. But we don't know when it's going to happen, because Putin is currently stalling the process and not confirming the meeting with Erdogan that's been planned for quite a while now.
Julian, what kind of circumstances you can predict if Ukraine won't export grain because of Russian shelling?
Well, we can predict that food prices in the world markets are going to go up, and also it's going to be instability, and African countries are going to be the most affected. So, oh, and another thing is, of course, what President Putin is trying to achieve by blocking Ukrainian exports. We've heard him say that he's suggesting that he's going to give Russian grain for free, but Russian grain, A, is of a worse quality than Ukrainian grain, and B, we understand that Putin is trying to make African countries dependent on Russia. And when they are dependent, of course, Putin is looking for voices on the United Nations. And so this way he can continue ruining the world order that was created after the Second World War. And so that's one of the goals that he is pursuing by his aggression in Ukraine.
And what about grain for Ukraine? Will the country be with grain in spite of this shelling and aggression?
Ukraine has enough grain to feed its own citizens. So currently, the issue at stake is exports and being able to earn hard currency to continue Ukrainian economy going, because the economy has contracted significantly due to the war, and so grain exports are one of the components of keeping Ukraine budget sufficiently financed.
What now are the main ways to stop Russia? Because, okay, NATO Council, okay, they say don't do this. Okay, Russia continues shelling. Russia doesn't care about anything that our partners say because it continues shelling. What to do? The main ways to stop it?
Well, it's the most difficult question, of course, and there is no easy answer to it. Currently, Ukraine is working. We understand that the key to this problem is Russian aggression against Ukraine, because if there were no aggression, then there would be no need to discuss all of these issues that we're discussing here today. And Ukraine's currently working with its partners. After the Vilnius summit, there was a declaration signed with G7 countries on security guarantees to Ukraine. And so Ukraine's working on bilateral agreements with the countries, with the G7 countries, and a number of other countries have joined this initiative. And of course, the continued sanctions pressure on Russia to undermine its ability to keep launching this aggression against Ukraine, and of course, diplomatic efforts and trying to involve China, because this current crisis also affects China, because China was one of the biggest importers of Ukrainian grain. So we understand that Russian aggression needs to be stopped, but it's a very difficult task that's going to take many efforts at many levels. Of course, military and use of force would have been the most efficient one, but we see the policy of NATO and other Western countries trying to avoid confrontation with Russia, and so it really slows down the resolution of this issue.
And what do you think, your opinion, what kind of punishment for such kind of behavior should be for Russia? For making people suffer all over the world, not only Ukrainians?
Well, of course, Russia has to be isolated. Russia has to be its actions have to be condemned. It has to be economically isolated. Of course, if possible, we already see that there was an arrest warrant issued for President Putin, and we already see how he could not travel to the BRICS summit in South Africa because of the arrest warrant. So he's already facing some consequences, but those consequences are definitely not sufficient. And hopefully, when Ukraine wins the war, and the Russian leadership and everybody involved in launching this aggression are going to be punished under international law.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for all your explanations. And I'll remind to our viewers, Yulia Kazdobina, head of the Ukrainian Foundation for Security Studies and a senior fellow with the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. So it's really now important to understand that now the world unites to fight the humanitarian crisis and hunger caused by Russian terrorism, and Ukraine now battles Russian-induced grain cutoff. Stay with us to understand all these very important, not only for Ukraine, facts. It was UATV for English. We broadcast from the heart of Europe. See you.